Welcome to another episode of Soap Thing Thoughts. Joining me today is Erik Rodak. Welcome to the Soap Thing Project. What's going on, man?
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
You've been making quite a name for yourself in quite a fast hurry lately. I've noticed. Like you were,
Y-
nobody even knew you existed, and all of a sudden, boom, there he was. So,
y- Yeah, some of that was not even by my doing. I'm still wondering how that happened, but glad to be here.
so you're currently working in pottery at the moment. How did you get into How did you get into that? How did the whole pottery business get started?
Man, it's an interesting story. I had graduated from Wayne State University and entered the workforce, and I had a client that was a ceramicist, make pretty good money each year, and very interesting how he had turned basically his studio. He had rezoned it into a residential space, so he lived in it, he worked in it, he had all his kilns there. And I had always been not always, but maybe for 5 or 6 years, 4 or 5 years at the time, I had become a hobbyist painter. And I had just I wanted to expand the mediums I had been using. And I had him as a client, and he had brought me over to see a studio one day. And he just said, "Hey, why don't you take some clay and see what happens?" And next thing you know, I ended up, it kind of, it kind of, it was like an infection, it took over my life a little bit. And now I end up spending a significant more amount of time on clay than I do even painting. So
Right. So how do you get your hands on clay? Is that something, do you have to make it? Do you source it? Like how does one get their hands on like a bulk amount of that?
that's a really good question. That's actually evolving for me as of now. Once you get into pottery making and working with ceramics, you'll find that there actually are stores kind of all around you. That there's two different places in Michigan I go, both kind of near the Ann Arbor area, that they locally source Michigan clay. And it adds up, of course, depending on how much you buy, but relatively, clay is pretty cheap, yeah, even to buy like that. The big thing is just shipping, so if you can go and pick it up at a store, it's really not relatively a huge amount of money. But also, the more experienced I get, the more it's like, why even buy processed clay from the store when you can just kind of go and get it yourself? There are some rules in Michigan. There's the DNR, Department of Natural Resources. You're only allowed to take, I think, 25 pounds from public land or state land, if it's not by a stream. But if you do have private property, like for example, I plan to go up north, Michigan, to the cabin this spring and summer and just dig and refine it yourself. Which the way I'm learning how to do it is called sedimentation. You basically dig a clay pit and you just kind of put some rocks, and then you dig another clay pit next to it that's underneath it, and you just sort of drain the water from one pit to the next, that's filled with the clay. And then naturally, clay particles will suspend, so they'll separate themselves with water and gravity, basically. So long story short, what I'm planning to get into more this spring and summer up in northern Michigan is treating and refining my own wild clay.
Right. Because I imagine clay, while it's not as heavy as some other things, is heavy enough that it would be expensive to ship if you get a
Oh,
lot of it.
yeah, kills you. It kills you. I mean, you can get 2, 3 times as much if you just go to the store and pick it up instead of having it shipped. It's pretty
Right.
crazy.
So do you have any products nearby that are completed?
Oh, yeah, I can grab something real quick. So here's a few of them. They're just sitting on the top of the kiln right behind me. I actually didn't like how these came out. So these are kind of like, you always have just extra pieces sort of laying around that are like, maybe I'll refire it, maybe I'll recycle it, do something with it. But this was some orange I had planned. And then if you can see on this one right here, this is something I'm doing on my lather bowls now. I call it a containment lip around the surface. So as you take your brush out of the bowl, you can kind of scrape it against the lip and control the amount of lather that's on your brush.
Nice.
Uh,
I like that.
yeah, it was a idea by a shaver. His name is Mike Bailey. Bowtie RN is his name on social media, But he made the suggestion. You know, a lot of times as an artist too, you kind of want to not you want to just make what you want to make, and you try to block out suggestions and this and that. But he said it, and I like the idea of it. And you know, in my now to the open public drop, a lot of these bowls have this containment lip in them. So I'm going to see how that goes, and that those kind of things evolve. But another thing that a lot of them have is an unglazed foot ring here.
Right.
And some of the bowls I add pinstripes to, just for, I'm thinking of any extra texture that's going to help when you go to grip these bowls, however you grip them. And that raw ceramic there really gives even if your hand is wet, it gives you traction. So a lot of people are scared about dropping ceramic bowls. I don't know if anyone's seen Tobin's review. His bowl went flying across the room. He was doing a YouTube review, and it didn't break. So he was pretty psyched about that. But this is another look. I have some of these bowls available too. This is called marbling. You were asking about clay. This is actually terracotta and white stoneware mixed together. And then before you throw it on the wheel, you don't fully homogenize it and wedge it together. You just take a piece of red and a piece of white, and you kind of slap it together, and then just throw it like that on the wheel. So you get this kind of special look, and it's earthy. For those that really understand clay, it's a favorite look for me. But like I said here, this one I had I had black on the inside, and then I didn't like how it came out, and I tried to refire it with some orange, and then you can see the black and the orange under it.
Right.
It's kind of just like, this is kind of just like a science project at this point. So you always have stuff like this laying around.
So let's hit the brakes for a minute, because there's a lot that you said that I want to unpack for a second.
Sure.
The first thing is, up until now, I've had my reservations about buying like ceramic shave bowls. Like I've got other bowls that are made out of like resin, the same as like the resin, the stuff they make resin brushes out of, and I've got some other ones that are like half stone, half plastic, and things like that. Just because I have been known to drop things. So how durable is pottery? How durable are pottery shave bowls, if we're being honest?
Sure. Well, I'm not going to lie to you. If you drop them from up here all the way to the ground, it's like, how durable is an iPhone? You know what I mean? If they break, if you drop it without a case. But at the same time, it's not quite as much of like a slippery bar of soap as people think. If you have the foot ring and you're holding on to that, and that's in contact with your skin, it's going to stay tough. And then also, again, I said I didn't want to lie, but I've dropped them from height before onto tile, and they've bounced and not broken. So you never really know. Ceramic is it's a very hard material, but in terms of physics, it's very, very inelastic. It's very brittle. So if it's hit directly on a small point with a small surface area, it's gonna, you know what I mean, it will break. But the foot ring is leveled. There's a lot of traction on it. And you know what? Different materials are for different people. I do like resin, but I don't think a lot of people know what modern day resin is. It's not like the resin used for your brush handles is not like tree resin. It's not natural resin from out of a tree.
No, it's synthetically generated.
Yeah, it's epoxides. It's kind of like liquid plastic that sets really fast. So I think it's like what's the difference between eating off of a paper or a plastic plate versus a ceramic plate? Well, I mean, both get the job done really, right? But once you get a house and you have a family and you sit down for dinner, there comes a point where you're going to stop
bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to eat off paper plates anymore.
So you mentioned that little lip around the inside of the of the bowl to kind of keep the mess out, so that way you don't end up with too much lather going all over the place. You're actually the first person I've ever seen that's done that. Like most shaving bowls, I don't think I've ever seen one that has that.
Yeah. I haven't either. That's kind of the beauty of a hand maker, an individual independent artist like me, is like, I can make 5 of one bowl, and then I can completely change and make 5 more bowls that are a different style, and then completely change that up and try something new. And
it's not like machining where the more of the same thing you make, the cheaper it is. You can pretty much just do what you want.
Exactly. And it does that really doesn't affect my cost. Like, say if I use say if I use a ball of clay each time, that's 0.75 pounds, right? 3/4 of a pound. Or is that too? No, that's right. If I use a ball each time for each shave bowl, that's about 3/4 of a pound. Then it doesn't really change the bottom line if I want to put a lip on this one, or if I want to make a little, do something different on another one. You know, that's kind of the art of small batch ceramics.
Right. Now you mentioned that the ones you grabbed are the ones that didn't quite make the cut.
Exactly. Yep.
So what if somebody like me said to you, you know what, I will take the imperfections. Do you have any intention of like putting them out as like factory seconds, markdown, whatever like
That's, you
that?
know, that's potters regularly do a thing called seconds. And so I kind of like, what happens is you have a box set aside, and then you have all these kind of things. Eventually you just put it in the box to meet its fate, whatever it is going to be. And then one day you bring the box out, you refire maybe everything one more time, or you take out what's halfway decent, you sell it as seconds. And then always, if anybody's following me on Instagram or Facebook, or even people will come by the studio, like every now and then my mom will stop by the studio, and she'll take like she'll take like 50% of all of that stuff. You know, she loves those boxes, but they always, something always fun always ends up happening with them. Sometimes they sell, and also, you know, there's a price for everything. So people constantly were like, "Oh, you're gonna throw that away? Please, no. Let me give you $20 for it." I'm all for that if somebody sees something, but at the same time, the more experience I get as an artist, the more picky you get with yourself. The more you're like, if this doesn't meet my standards, just let it go, let it die. And the easier that gets, the more you make.
No, that makes perfect sense. So give me a kind of a crash course on how bowls like that are made, you know, from start to finish. How long does it take, and what all steps do you have to take to do that?
You know, someone just asked me this question yesterday. How long does one bowl take? And you know what? It's always a little bit difficult to break down the time on one piece, because the thing is, you're always making, like, I'm never just going to sit down for the day and make one bowl, and then the next day come back and trim that one bowl, and you know, it's like you're always making 20, 40, 60 at a time, and then
Right.
coming back and them all together.
And then
you know, so
and then the whole project turns into such a whirlwind that you lose track of time.
well, yeah, I mean, you can keep track of time. Like, this took me 3 days to get this batch done. That's easy. But it's like, how long did this one take you? Oh, I have no idea. You know what I mean? I just went through 40 of them. It's kind of hard. But
Right.
what has to be done for a quick crash course with clay, if you've seen it, like, everybody knows the famous scene from Ghost, right? Where what's her name? Demi Moore's on the wheel. The clay
Yeah.
is wet. The clay is wet in that scene. That's called wheel throwing. The clay is it's called elastic at that stage, or plastic at that stage. That's like when you take clay right out of the bag and it's ready to throw. It's squishy, it's moldable, it's mendable. So the centrifugal force of the pottery wheels used, you put a little pressure, open the clay, make a nice little bowl, and it's wet, right? Then you take it off and you let that dry for about 18 to 24 hours. And you come back the next day and you trim the little foot ring onto it. I'll trim the little lines around the foot ring. I'll trim the indentation into the bottom of the foot ring so the bottom can be glazed. And then then once you trim it, it has to be set up, and it'll take, you know, for these bowls, it takes about 24 to 36 hours for them to dry all the way bone dry, because they can't be any moisture left in it whatsoever. So when it's first on the wheel, it's like 100% wet. When you're trimming it, it's about 50% wet. And then once you trim it, you let it dry to 100% dry. There's no moisture left in it. And then you're ready to give it its first fire. So if it has any moisture left in it and you go to fire it, it'll explode because the water expands too fast. That's still trapped in the clay.
So when you say explode, it will literally go kabloom.
Oh yeah, you'll hear it in the kiln.
Right.
I've been there plenty of times. It's like, sometimes it's a gunshot. You know, it's like, maybe it's a little exaggeration, but when you're sitting right next to the kiln and you're not expecting it, and you're on the wheel, and then boom, you're like, what? Like, it's like it very startles you very much.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. All right.
Yeah, we have to think. The surface of the clay is always going to dry out first. So a lot of times you can even look at the clay and it looks dry, and there's still a ton of moisture trapped in the thick parts of the clay. So one trick is, if you hold up the clay to your cheek And if the clay is not room temperature, then you know it's still in the process of drying and there's still water in it. So it can be very tricky. And it's like that's where the artist comes in again. Just by touch and feel and look over time, you just know if something's dry or not. And unfortunately, you have to break a lot of stuff in the process. But once that fire does come out successfully, then it comes out. It's no longer clay. Now it's called vitrification at high heat. Molecules bind, and then it comes out raw ceramic. Like if you've ever changed your own brake pads are raw ceramic. Then that raw ceramic is microporous. So that's when you can glaze 1, 2, 3 layers of glaze on it and fire it again. Once it comes out of that fire, then you have your completed ceramic glazed piece.
Right. That makes sense. So when you glaze a piece of ceramic, unless you've done it the exact same way before, is it kind of a roll of the dice how the color is going to come out when it goes from, wet to dry, raw to cooked, if that makes any sense?
That's a great question. And you know what? It's always, no matter what, it's always a little bit of a roll of the dice. Like I had said about stuff exploding, like potters, you'll hear them like we joke about like the ceramic gods, and like it's up to them now. You know what I mean? It's like no matter what, nothing is for sure. Anything can explode and break. I was just thinking the other day, I had this bowl. It was about a year or two ago. I had this big bowl I like come out, and I had brought it home, and I set it on the counter. And me and somebody else were sitting there talking. We were talking about it looking, and it just split, and the two halves flew across the table, and no one touched it or nothing. We were just looking at it, and me and the person looked at each other like, "Is there a ghost in here or something?" That was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. The thing, it didn't just
That's
break.
creepy.
It break and flew apart both, and we were like, "What the heck is that?" But yeah, just to make a long story short, is like you never know what's going to happen. But what you can do to offset that is called glaze testing. And I have this tiny little kiln. I actually have 4 kilns, and I have one that's really small kiln that's designed for glaze testing. And you take little test tiles, and you take your glaze, and for example, I'll put 1 layer on this one, 2 layers, 3 layers. And then I'll take that one, I'll mix it with another one, and I'll do a bunch of glaze tests, and you'll mark it, and you'll mark them with a marker or something so you know which one had what. You'll fire that, and then the small kiln hits temp really quick. So you can put your glaze tests in, and then later that day, you can have an idea of what you're going to get. So you do your glaze test first, you pick out your best test tile. Oh, I like the one with 2 layers of blue and 1 layer of white. So then you take your whole batch of stuff and you apply that glaze. So you have an idea, but still, it's an idea. It's 90%, 90% of what you'll get. And there's always variation, especially from the amount of oxygen entering and leaving the kiln while it's firing. Sometimes the stuff that's right by the peepholes, there's these little peepholes in the kiln to let air in and out slightly during firing. Like your pieces that are right next to the peepholes, sometimes they'll have like a whole side of them that's a different color because that side was receiving a lot more oxygen during its firing. So
right,
it's kind of like who knows.
So what is a kiln and how does it work?
A kiln is the oven that the ceramics are being fired in. I guess we just started throwing that word around. I guess we should explain. I've learned that they're actually not quite as complicated as they seem. They seem like these huge, big, enormous ovens, and they are. But once you actually take them apart and stuff, you're like, it's kind of just a sheet metal wrapped in a cylinder. And within that cylinder, there's soft brick all the way around it. And then in the soft brick, there's these grooves that metal elements go into. And metal elements are just, there's a special metal that heats up very hot. And it's like a spring, sort of, small spring. They're called elements. And the elements are embedded in the soft brick evenly all around the kiln. And then all of them come back to a controller in the front of the kiln, and they're wired electrically to that. And then the kiln's plugged in, and then you set the kiln however you need to. It fires to whatever when you turn it on, the elements are heated electrically. And you can honestly, kilns that have electronic controllers on it, man, you can go on there like a computer and just say, I'll go up to here, boop, 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 program it, and they pretty much fire themselves nowadays. Right. Back in the day, kiln was like, we had to, build brick kiln outside, and you had to wood fire it and feed it, stoke it with fire.
Right.
for hours.
It was pretty primitive.
Yes, the primitive version of it, but either way, a kiln is just the oven that ceramics are fired in, whether it's a wood kiln, an electric kiln like mine, or there's gas kilns. So kilns are basically split up between oxidation and reduction kilns. Reduction kilns use gas, and oxidation kilns just use electricity in the atmosphere around it.
Right. So how did you get into making pottery shaving products? How'd you stumble, excuse me, into that one?
Well, honestly, I was at Eastern Market Detroit. You're probably familiar, but with anybody that isn't familiar, that's not from Michigan, Eastern Market Detroit is it's a humongous farmers market, kind of just outside of the heart of downtown Detroit. Maybe not just, but pretty close, honestly. And there's these like 8 huge sheds, and they're always holding events. Obviously, farmers markets. But they also have art shows. They do wedding. They do all kinds of stuff there, and it's a really awesome place if you're ever in Detroit. Stop by Eastern Market, especially on a weekend. But I had been doing a show there, and coincidentally, I ran into a retailer of shaving products. I had sold some products at his store for a very short amount of time. The business just didn't match up quite between us, and we ended up going our separate ways. But
Yeah, and I know what you're talking about.
yeah. But it's okay. Whatever happened happened. But through that, I just got interested in the community because so often, and there's nothing wrong with this, I still do love serving this community too, but so regularly often at art shows and pottery shows, your biggest client is mostly ladies. It's mostly women that they want something for the kitchen. They want flower vases. And most times when there would be male customers, they would be buying something for their lady.
Yeah, I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. We can tell it like it is. I mean, that's
yeah.
that's the typical clientele for this sort of stuff.
Well, that's the typical clientele for a potter too, because you have to think about the most regular items that you think of a potter. What's the number one thing you think of when you think of a pottery maker? People think of coffee mugs, so there's nothing wrong. I love serving that community of people too, and being in that community of people too. But what really interested me was just the masculine side of pottery, basically, and how I could serve this industry. And I just noticed that, respectfully, a lot of people use wood or resin in this industry, and it just seemed like an opportunity for me to introduce ceramic into that mix too.
Right. I mean, other people have done it and do currently do it, but you kind of came out into this thing with a lot of how do I say this? A lot of talent for it just right out of the gate. Like you just kind of dropped into the scene knowing what you were doing.
Yeah.
So that kind of gave you, in my opinion, a little bit of an edge.
Yeah,
because,
I have a little bit of a head start because for some reason I'd see those little bowls and then I'd see brush mugs, and then the big thing was like I'd see brush handles and I see the form of the brush handles, like the shape of the handle, and then how the brush knot fits into it. And I would just look at brushes and I'd go like, man, I know I could throw those on the wheel. Like I know I could make these on the wheel. There's something about it. It'd be really cool. It'd be different. But right away, I was like, I know I have the actual wheel throwing skill to make whatever size, whatever shape I need to make. And something about it just said, hey, you're a young guy. There's not a lot of people doing this in this industry. And these shapes are very interesting, especially the brush handle shapes. Very interesting. So for some reason, I feel that way about it too. I feel like I was just able to kind of drop in and see if there was interest, and there has been. So I want to push it now and see how far I can really take that.
Right. I mean, as long as you're that kind of artisan where you have to make things in batches, you drop a bunch and they sell out, and you drop a bunch and then they sell out. I imagine you're going to be quite successful with it. What gets people jaded is when there's too much supply in the market. You have lots and lots and lots of this stuff, and it's always in stock and always available. As long as you put yourself in a situation usually through no choice of your own, where there's pent up demand,
Yes, that's
uh,
what I'm looking for. Yeah.
you're going to be successful. But I think there's other segments of this hobby where there's products that are easier to make, and so therefore there's a lot of them. And so I think the supply is outpacing demand in
Yep,
some
I've heard of
aspects.
people say this. Yeah,
So
I've heard. Yep, I've heard there's a lot, something like 300 to 400 artisans in the wet shaving community online now, and that there some people don't know about the demand. And for that reason, I just want to add that that's why I don't plan on buying a lathe and start making resin and wood handle. I don't plan on jumping into that anyways.
right,
If I looked at this industry and it was already flooded with potters and ceramics, I probably would have just done mostly what I was doing. Maybe I'd make like sometimes I make coffee pour overs. If anybody's familiar with that, it's like this little ceramic coffee cup you put over a coffee mug, and then you can make a single serving of coffee by pouring boiling water over the coffee filter, and it drains through the pour over. Every now and then,
interesting.
yeah. See, I didn't know that either, but I learned it from doing shows. Real coffee connoisseurs, they want to go to their local potter for pour overs. So I've made a couple of those, and they sell. And then I also made these little ring. Do I have one right here somewhere? I also made these little ring holders. Women, I had no idea about this either, but especially girls that like a lot of rings, or guys, whatever. Many of them on their vanity keep like jewelry dishes and trinkets. And there's this thing called a ring holder. It's like a little trinket dish with a thing sticking up, and the girls just set their rings on them because a ring is a small item. It's easy to lose. So
Right.
I forget what my point was there anyways, but you learn these little things that I just make a couple of them as specialty items for people that are really in those niches, and those kind of sell just because that one person in the niche always looking for that item, right? So my point was, I guess, if I would have come and seen that, there's 300 artisans, 400 artisans in this community. If I would have seen it was already flooded with ceramicists and potters and ceramics, I would have just said, hey, I'll do a piece here or there, but I'm not really going to try to go. The market's already saturated.
Right.
There might be
The,
300. There might be 300 artisans here, but even if the artisans even if the artisans are growing and the demand isn't yet, that'll correct itself, I think, because the more
well,
artisans are, the more people are going to be interested, the more people are going to be coming in. And I do feel like there's a market opportunity for ceramics in wet shaving and grooming, especially the type of people that love like their fancy stuff. There's a lot of guys that are like retired, kind of, they got maybe some disposable income, and they love just buying the nicest shaving stuff they can. So there's different segments of the market, like you said. I'm sorry, I'll let you talk now.
yeah, no, that's fine. But you make a good point that I've brought up occasionally about the fact that I think we are going to experience a bad year when it comes to shaving soap makers. Because I think for a variety of reasons, this is going to be the year that there's that market correction. We've already seen a lot of it uh, at the tail end of 2022 and going into 2023. I think it's going to be rough. I think and I think the ones that are going to go, most of those are going to be ones that haven't been around that long. The ones that have already withstood the test of time are going to continue to do so because they're established names, whereas some of the lesser known entities in shaving soap making, I hate to say it, they're going to die a young person's death.
Yeah.
It sucks, it really does. But I think they overestimated the size of the wet shaving hobby, and I think they overestimated how rapidly it was growing. I think this community, this subculture, this hobbyist group, whatever you want to call it, always was a lot smaller than I think a lot of artisans thought it was. And I don't think it's growing quite as fast as a lot of people think it is. And I think what happened was a lot of soap makers and even a lot of brush makers and razor makers were, turned into sharks and thought they were smelling blood in the water. And so they saw an opportunity. And now with I think the inflation has some to do with it. Supplies are getting too expensive, but I think 2023, even without the supply chain issues and the inflation and all that, I think 2023 always was going to be the year where a lot of people figured out, a lot of hobbyists figured out that they were overextended.
Yeah.
That they had too many soaps, too many razors,
Yep.
hopefully not that many bowls, but
Yeah.
I think there got to be too much redundancy in the market.
Hmm.
And thankfully, I'm looking around and I don't see that problem for you at the moment.
I don't either. I think I was trying to navigate that because, especially coming into this year, I didn't want to put any more time into a community if it wasn't going to be worth it for my business, And that's why, man, if I was a razor maker and an engineer or a soap maker or something, and the last 2 years I was trying to get into soap making and razor making, it would have been tough. I would have probably said, hey, all things considered, I'll opt out of that because it's just too saturated for the size that the market is right now. But first of all, it's something I'm actually passionate about because, like I said, the market I'm serving, it's so much different from the market I'm serving. And I like this different avenue, so to speak. And I like kind of the community of cool guys that, I've built a lot of friendships very quickly now with some very cool guys, which that doesn't happen from just selling flower vases at shows, So,
Right.
First of all, it's something I'm very passionate about. And second, even though there are people making bowls, of course, I'm not trying to say I'm the first person to do this, that, or the other thing, but I do think what I'm doing is unique compared to other people making the same type of items that I'm making. I
Right.
really I don't see anybody else with their face, with their pottery wheel, with their items actually being made and posted on video and their brand, and they're one man independent artist from start to finish, making, selling, marketing, and delivering a product to the customer. I just don't see anybody else doing that. So
No, you're definitely the loudest guy in the room at the moment.
yeah.
When it comes to making, let me put it to you this way: when it comes to making shaving bowls and brush cups and things like that, are there specific shapes or forms that are harder to manipulate than others?
You know what, man, people don't realize how much thought and painstaking effort goes into like just the shape of a bowl, whether it's soup bowl or pasta bowl. Man, the last year of my life, I've really just thought of how can you improve this shape, and you wouldn't think it's that much from just a small little bowl, but how convex the walls are, the texture on the inside of the bowl to be a good lathering texture, but to not damage brushes. The size of the foot ring and whether it's glazed or unglazed or this texture or that texture, so there's good grip. The one-handed ergonomics of the bowl, so much goes into it. And I guess now at this point, it's just kind of a checklist in my head as I'm on the wheel, sitting there going through making it. There's just kind of these little points I give myself on each thing. Make sure this is right. 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 And I think it just leads to it leads overall to a product that's you wouldn't think until you actually use one. Man, this bowl is literally made to hold in one hand and lather with. You know what I mean? I really want them, and I really put a lot of effort into making them kind of fit like a glove into this routine that people have for their wet shaving.
Right. You're kind of in the same situation that in a funny way that Jake Yates was when I was talking to him on his episode. Because I mean, everybody can look at you and tell that you're not a shaver, right?
Yeah.
So you're on the outside looking in, looking for a proper form and function based on pretty much exclusively on other people's feedback.
Yeah.
Basically, you're passionate about making the bowl,
Yeah.
but you're obviously less passionate about using it because you wouldn't use it on a daily basis, like you do like loads of test and evaluation. I mean, I can assume,
Yeah.
but but you're getting most of your strategy from people who are in the hobby and getting, making bowls and getting feedback and redoing it and
Yes.
getting more feedback, redo it again. And I think that's in some ways a better place to be, because if you
Hmm.
were a shaver and you had a bowl that works perfectly for you, then you're going to try your damnedest to sell that form and
Right.
function rather than responding to the desires of the market.
Right. And you know what I do? I do like, of course, pick them up and use them. But I think like the ergonomics and how it's going to function. I think that's part of my job as the artist and that's trying to deliver a product. That's part of my job to make that the best that I can. And I can do it myself and see what I think is the best. But overall, I think the biggest tool when it comes to that, really, I would say, is imagination. Of course, the reviews back from people, I definitely take it into account, and I fix it and I address anything that reviewers give me back. But first and foremost is the imagination. Not only imagining myself going into the bathroom, but I try to imagine the guys that I know going into the bathroom and using it with the brushes they have. And that's like, I think that's the superpower of the artist's imagination. You have to like really be able to see guys using this in the morning or at night or whenever they go to shave, like what's going to give them a good time, what are they going to complain about, and what are they going to love, and just try to go the right way each time with things. And of course, you're never going to make everybody happy, so also just learning to deal with people when they're unsatisfied.
Right. The biggest thing that I look for in a brush bowl is that it's smooth, because the very first brush bowl I ever got was a granite stone one, and it was not smooth at all, and it scratched the utter hell out of my shave brush, and it was pretty infuriating. So I can understand the need to really get the glazing done
Yeah.
properly
Yeah,
so that you're
the
not
texturing and the glazing on the inside of the bowl is like the last month of my man. I've really, that's just what it's hard to really even put into words until you really sit there and try to get it right on a product. Man, it's like so much thought has gone into just the different textures and then how the glaze will lay over those textures. And I just really learned, man, guys are really, and to no fault of their own, guys spend good money on their brushes, so they're very protective of the bristles on their brushes, especially animal hair brushes, which now I can totally understand.
right. Well, Eric, it is getting to be close to time to get out of here. What do you have for parting words of wisdom for the wet shaving hobbyist community?
Parting words of wisdom. Oh man, I don't get
You
asked that.
you can either do that, or you can do the 30-second elevator speech where you got to sell your products in 30 seconds.
Oh
So if
geez. Oh man,
so if
put
I
on the
never met you
spot right
before
at
and
the
didn't know
end
a
here.
thing about you, what would you say and how would you say it in 30 seconds?
I'm Erik Rodak. I'm a ceramic and painting artist from Michigan. My website is erikrodak.co. I'd say my work is inspired by nature. Uh, Everything is handmade from start to finish. Everything is marketed, sold, and delivered by the artist. So please give my business a try, give my products a try. And also, I'm one person here making it, and I'm all ears, especially guys in the wet shaving community. Try a product out, support a local business, support a hand maker, support a craftsman, and please let me know how the things work, because what I'm doing now, it's an evolution. I'm hoping that this first drop that I just did, it's going to be like the starting point. And then 10, 15, 20 years from now, Tobin and some of the other boys will be able to look back and say, like, look, this was my boy. This is the first bowl I got from him 20 years ago. And it's going to be a good ride. I think it's all up from here. So That's the
Well,
best I
let's
can.
hope so. I'm pretty confident about that too. Well, Erik, I want to thank you for coming on the Soap Thing project and talking about your journey and your products. I will go ahead and put Erik Rodak's website down here in the description of the video. And you get your own YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yep. Instagram and YouTube is both Rodak94, Rodak 94.
Okay. Well, I will look at your YouTube channel and I will go ahead and put the card for that up at the top of the screen at the beginning of the video. So if you happen to miss that all the way at the beginning, go ahead and check that out. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Yes. Hey, thank you. I really want to thank you for having me on your platform. Then just take a second and just say, man, that actually kind of flew by. That was a good conversation. So
yeah.
I really enjoy. Maybe one day in the future we'll have another one sometime soon. But I really do appreciate the time and the space on your platform today.
Right, man. Maybe one of the next times you do a drop, we'll go ahead and
sure,
and bang one out, and you can go over some of the new products you got.
Sounds good. Anytime.
But in the meantime, questions or comments, put them in the comment section of the video. And until next time, this is Soap Thing telling you, shave like you mean it. Thanks for watching.